This is Work, Leisure, and Media, Part 6, Exposure to Controversial Media. We're going to talk about 3 areas in which research mainly focuses on sex, drugs, and violence, not rock and roll violence. Okay, let's start with talking about sex. More than 70% of all television shows contain an explicit sexual content, and even more contain content that is implied. Adolescents seem to be susceptible to the message that is given in many television shows and movies that women are objects. This is problematic. Many studies find that when there is repeated exposure, that's when it starts to affect an adolescent's attitudes, beliefs, and intentions about sex. We can't really talk about adolescents' media exposure regarding sex without talking about pornography. Virtually all men have been exposed to pornography before the age of 18, and 2/3 of women. The problem happens when adolescents start to believe that that's what sex is supposed to look like, that's what's supposed to happen, these are the ideals, and that is when they get a skewed viewpoint of the reality. Pornography doesn't really address the complex, intricate details of a relationship. And not just that, but a relationship that seems intimate enough to actually have sex. So that's where the problem with pornography is in terms of adolescent development. Let's talk about body image. We've talked about body image in prior modules, but talking about media, we have to talk about the widespread body dissatisfaction, particularly among adolescent females, due to repeated media exposure. So adolescent girls who frequently read fashion magazines, those who frequently view appearance-related television and web advertisements and follow influencers that are quote appearance related, they are more dissatisfied with their bodies than girls who do not. There's also evidence that spending a lot of time on social media sites can increase a girl's body image concerns because you're scrolling and constantly comparing. We do see similar trends with the very limited amount of data that we've collected on boys, but boys will also feel body dissatisfaction when faced with media images of muscular body types. Friends, let me just say before I go on to the next slide that Instagram is not reality. Okay, violence. More than 60% of TV programming contains violence. That's a lot. When we really look at careful studies on violent video games, which is such a hot topic, but when we actually really look at the research, what we find is that playing violent video games does not make an adolescent more aggressive. And while this is the case, like it doesn't necessarily increase violent behavior, it doesn't make them more aggressive. What it actually might do is change their attitude about the acceptance of aggressive behavior towards somebody else. So repeated exposure to violence can desensitize the view of aggression. Drugs. Nearly 75%. This statistics from your book, so please bear with me. Nearly 75% of, quote, network dramas. Okay, so not comedies on television. And when they call it primetime network programming, this is before streaming services were really, really big. But nearly 75% of network dramas and nearly all top grossing movies and half of music videos show either alcohol, tobacco, and or illicit drug use. So what does the exposure of this type of behavior do in reflection on an adolescent's behavior? Well, studies of exposures to ads in particular for alcohol and tobacco and anti-smoking commercials, which I'm sure everybody has seen at least one, those actually have shown to have effect on changing attitudes about drinking and smoking. But it goes both ways. It actually could change it for the better, more positively, but it can also change it more negatively. However, it again, we have to relate back to that last video. It's really hard to know whether changing an adolescent's exposure to the message about drinking and smoking actually does change their behaviors. We have to watch out for all of those problems in terms of data collection and interpretation, again, particularly in adolescent development. And that concludes this video.